Would it have been better if I? Oh, uh-oh. Now I'm really loud. Cool. All right. I hope you all grabbed a sheet on your way in. Yeah, writing utensil. You will need both of those. If you were here last week, this will be similar. In fact, you would have had Bryant Weathers. He led last week the adult class and was slated to lead this week as well. But he's in Chicago. And when you're in Chicago and you're hoping to fly here and weekends like this happen, I understand, forget about it, right? So blessings to you, Bryant. Hope you make it home safe and in good time for your family and work. But so you have me. So I've also invited our high school students and junior high students. Those who didn't go, so Marcus is on a trip this weekend with those age groups out at Camp Luther. So anyways, I'm pulled over here, so welcome one and all. But we're going to follow basically the same format from last week. So I'm coming in, I've done a very little prep work. I was going a different direction, but I think it makes sense. We'll basically be walking through the text for the day together and observing things that maybe slip past us, asking questions, and reading some connected texts and applying it to ourselves. So before we do all of that, let's open in a word of prayer, hey? Dear Jesus, you are the source of all wisdom. You are wisdom incarnate. And we ask you today in this hour that you would send to us your spirit of wisdom, that you would open us up to the wisdom of your word, that it would enlighten us, that we might go from this place equipped by you for the good works and good deeds that you have prepared for us already in advance. We know that we won't get everything right. And that's the beauty of you, Jesus. You don't give us a bunch of dogma or doctrines to memorize and make sure we accomplish correctly. You give us yourself. So above all, help us to go out in that confidence, knowing that you are with us in all of the decisions that we make. It's in your name, Jesus, that we pray. Amen. All right, so just kind of kicking off, what we'll do is read through again the text of the day. And as we go, you might take notes of anything that arouses questions for you. And I will ask if there's a volunteer who will read for us from 1 Kings 3. If you need a Bible as well, there's a whole rack in the narthex, but maybe you already knew that. So 1 Kings 3, 16 to 28. Anne's on it.
Okay, then two prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "Oh, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. Then on the third day, after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth, and we were alone. There was no one else with us in the house. Only we two were in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. to him to do justice.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anne. So let's actually, I don't know if I said this, but I might say it a little different. Let's take time right now. Kind of split up into our small groups, right? So maybe a couple people next to you in your row. I'll join, if I may, the smallest of the groups in the back. Look, then we got perfect sets of three. Then we'll play, never mind. But let's split up and go ahead and jot down the questions and insights that you have now that you've heard the text and as you re-explore it. And go ahead and do that second piece as well, the identification of people and places. So we'll do those two things here in the next 5 minutes, and then we'll come back together and explore what we discover. I don't know if that went by fast for you. It went by fast for us. So we don't have a gazillion insights. We got a couple. But what were some of the things you noticed, or that stuck out to you, or maybe that made you question what was going on? Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm.
Prostitutes, you probably wouldn't have
Right.
gone to the king.
Yeah, that got brought out in our discussion as well, kind of like this is striking that there's prostitutes appearing before the king. Sure. Yeah, yeah. Right. So, yeah, so that's, and it's a testament as well, right, to the society of Israel that such a case could even be brought to the king. I mean, that's, you might, expect that from our government system today, for it to work accordingly. But yeah, even there, right, you're saying, yeah, would you make it past all the appeals? Good. Yeah. Any other thoughts, observations? Insights, questions.
Well, I think it's kind of telling that they emphasize they were alone.
Mm-hmm.
There was nobody else there. So there was no other witnesses. I mean, they point that out right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so no witnesses. I always also, I mean, just to me, I thought it was, I don't know that much. I'm not a very cultured guy. I was like, that's kind of interesting that they were living together. And I was told that there's a term for that. It's called a brothel, right? So these prostitutes were living together in a brothel, perhaps. But yeah, there's no other witnesses. So perhaps the reason that these earlier judges couldn't have resolved the case without any corroborating evidence. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
If it was a normal family, and the guys would be involved. The fathers of the babies would be involved normally.
Yeah.
If it was a normal family, and they would want to see the right thing done, but they don't know probably who the father is.
That's right. Yeah. So there's also a little bit of, you might see tragedy or brokenness in the episode as well, because here are these. Yeah, these are kind of the most vulnerable people you could imagine, right? Hmm.
Nowadays, and I realize back in the day they wouldn't have done this, but now if the baby's born, they usually do the baby's footprint and the mom's thumbprint
Hmm.
right away, so you can identify them.
Mm-hmm.
Or nowadays you could do DNA testing, but of course back then they couldn't. In case there was a mix-up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. But even, yeah, like socioculturally, if you don't have family or you don't have a husband and you're a woman, all of a sudden you're on the good graces of the community to basically support you. Like this is the only way a woman really can support herself, because it's not as if they are hired for labor, yeah, in these times.
Well, you wonder if it's important that it was a son, because if it was a
Mm. Oh, instead of a baby boy. Sure. Right. Well, let's scoot ahead. We'll go to this next section. We can kind of walk through this together. So we're going to read a couple of passages that are connected to this text. Certainly, the passage there, the verses preceding our selection. We'll start there, and then we'll kind of bounce across to these other passages just to help undergird our study. They're going to be connected somewhat. So yeah, let's start with 1 Kings chapter 3, and let's just go all the way back up to verse 1. Why not? If I could have a volunteer start us off, 1 Kings 3, verse 1. Yep. Go up to 15. Thank you, John. So, what pieces of that text help undergird your understanding or affect your understanding of the case that we read between Solomon and the two prostitutes? Or what about that caught your eye, even if it's unrelated? Yes, right. So it's not as if Solomon is this, king who's, you know, uh, taking credit, let's say, for achieving this status of wisdom and learned mind. Likewise, he's not just up there winging it, all right, like some people I know. Watch out for those guys. No, it's credited to. That's right. Yeah. And what do you make of those things? God, I find it interesting that we get these two alternative things that he didn't ask for, right? What do you make of those? Like, why do you think God mentioned those? Mm-hmm. So yeah, so it stands out. Those two. Yeah, yeah. So he's kind of being right. So yeah, it highlights for us Solomon's sort of servant king mindset towards the people. I'm kind of surprised that, God didn't say, but I don't know. Who knows what Solomon looked like or what was expected for him? But like, God mentions what riches and basically power, the life of your enemies. He doesn't say, you haven't asked for 1,000 wives, you know. Um, he comes to have those anyway. But yeah, anything else in this section of Solomon's prayer that stood up for? Yeah, Don. Tell me more. Like which piece? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the hand of his enemies. Uh-huh. Yeah, and I would say this, just as a generality, not a hard and fast, automatic rule of life, but would you say in general that wisdom is going to lead to those two things? Right? Usually, exactly. So in like the wisdom literature, right, the book of Proverbs, I had a professor say Proverbs is kind of like an 80-20 rule, all right? Like these things aren't God's promise to you that this is exactly what's going to happen. But if you follow these things, 80% of the time, like it's going to go well, right? And there's always exceptions, and that's kind of what the book of Ecclesiastes and Job is about. But by and large, there is a system, a design universe. And if you follow God's wisdom towards it, it will go well with you in the land, right? I wanted to include the first couple verses of this text. I know on the paper it said from 3 to 15, but I didn't want you to get like a too sugar-coated idea of Solomon and his reign, right? Because 3 to 15, it's pretty positive, right? The impression we get of Solomon. But did you catch those couple subtle warnings or foreshadowings of problems for Solomon? Hmm. Right? So, kind of included in and that's consistent in a lot of the Old Testament, right? Follow my ways, follow the design that I've constructed this universe. It's going to go well for you. If you don't, you'll basically reap your own trouble. What else did you notice? Any other things that sort of made you raise your eyebrows at this Solomon guy? Mm. Mm. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So Solomon had basically a great role model in the faith to kind of grow up under and watch. I think even the promises of God, right? Doesn't he evokes or invokes the name of David as sort of the foundation for his promises. Look, David followed me with all of his heart. Therefore, I'm going to fulfill those promises that I promised to David as well. The two other things that sort of caught my attention in this, and they're subtle. One is that sacrificing on the high places. Um, Typically, that's not a good thing. The high places in the Old Testament are associated with the pagan worship sites. You'll read right in verse 2, it says, the people were sacrificing at the high places. And then in verse 3, Solomon loved the Lord. Only he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. That's not so much saying Solomon was the only guy doing it, but saying Solomon was doing great, but there was this little piece about him, right? Which is, like the rest of the people, they were worshiping in settings that were more associated with pagan worship. Now, of course, they don't have the temple yet, but there is the tabernacle of God, right? That's where David would go into worship. He would go into the tabernacle where the Ark of the Covenant is. However, when it says he went to Gibeon to sacrifice there's a great high place. That's an allusion to 1 Samuel 14:35. That high place is a site that Saul set up. It was the first altar that King Saul set up, who would have been Solomon's grandfather, to sacrifice to Yahweh, actually. So kind of a bright spot in Saul's reign. And so the high places, it doesn't necessarily mean that Solomon was worshiping other gods. However, there's going to be this issue with kind of like surrounding nation worship practices and Israel being unique and not adopting those surrounding nations' worship practices, right? So this is until the temple is built and they have that located central place of worship, their worship practices, not just in high places, but in other stories in the Old Testament, sometimes take on the flavor of the surrounding nations. That's right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, don't quote me on this, or find me later and be like, hey, Pastor Kevin, you said this? And do quote me on it and then correct me. But I think that the actual tabernacle, the one that traveled with them, I think that was set up in Shiloh at this time. Yeah. But you'll notice at the end of the text, where is Solomon worshiping? Where is he making these sacrifices? After the dream. Did you catch that? After the dream. And stood where? Oh, well, there you go. Hey, I'll quote myself on it. I was wrong. It's not Shiloh, it's Jerusalem. But yeah, so interesting. Prior to this dream, Solomon's worshiping at this, and maybe there's some sentimentality with his grandfather. I don't know. That he's worshiping there at the high place at Gibeon. But after this dream, it's like, wait a minute. Let me go to the source. Let me go to the guy. Maybe, without the temple there, maybe the altar space at Gibeon was really kind of awe-inspiring and beautiful, and maybe the Jerusalem site was kind of like, oh, there's nothing going on here yet. But John. If those two, you're saying the place where David bought that land, is that Gibeon, basically, is the question? Where Solomon initially made those sacrifices, are you wondering? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. At the end of the text there in Jerusalem? Maybe. Yeah, maybe, because you're saying there would have been a site sort of already created. Yeah. Well, let's move on. So that's a larger chunk of text. The next few are going to be much shorter, and will somewhat supplement our reading here. So let's go to Exodus 18:16. Yeah, you want to read it for us and maybe give some context? Aha, so how does that connect to our text? Go ahead, Dale.
It suddenly makes sense to think about that in the case of the text of the prostitutes here. It goes with and says, already in the David, like I mentioned before, the administration was already there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how unique that this particular case got all the way to the king. And somehow, because it was already established way back in way before even David's time,
Mm-hmm.
concept of having, essentially helpers essentially,
Yeah.
elders and priests and so on, and not just have everything.
That's right, yes. Up in our discussion as well, that there's this system established within Israel, and here you see it implicitly at work. You would imagine, you'd read that in. Yes. Like, Kings doesn't make it outright obvious that this has gone up different layers, but likely, and that sort of makes sense with the result, right? When Solomon pronounces his judgment, everyone's like, oh my gosh. Well, yeah, if they've been tracking this case through each tier, right? So yeah, all the way back in the time of Moses, we see the origin of this system set up.
I don't picture that. I picture two prostitutes right in the beginning that would have said, get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
I think King Solomon, some other way, came in contact with them.
Go ahead.
My thought.
Uh-huh.
Because who would have cared back then?
Well, so this is interesting, and we are sort of arguing from silence here, right? Either way we go, right? But what you're drawing out, Don, is what we alluded to at the beginning, kind of like the surprise that this case is before the king, which would be a surprise in one sense, even if the system is working, because it's still like, what? Why are we wasting our time on this? And perhaps if it didn't go through the normal, or let's say somehow Solomon heard that this case had been thrown out and then had them come in, basically because he wanted to see it, which is sort of what you're suggesting, right? Yeah. Yeah, John.
Forgive me for interrupting, but Dorothy turned too short coming in. She's stuck.
Oh,
Is there somebody here that can yank her out or do some shuffling for her or something? She's right up there at the end of the driveway.
Joe's on it? Thank you very much. Tell them to call for reinforcements if they need. So yeah, either way, right? You're right. The text doesn't tell us outright that this went through the system that was sort of established for Israel. But in either way, there's a surprise that this case is before Solomon. Yeah.
Well, doesn't it involve the baby? And for Israel, they look at the babies as the future of their country. So at least a lot of the prior text concerned that children and babies were important.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell them to go away and not come to me, like when Jesus said.
Mm-hmm.
So whether the prostitutes were prostitutes, but this was still a child,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't the child's fault where he was born.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's jump over to Isaiah 49:15. Does anyone have that one pulled up by chance? Or, oh, you got it, Ann? Go for it.
Can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you.
So this would be God talking to the prophet Isaiah, right? And what connection do you see to our text today?
Well, the one woman didn't show compassion because she was going to have the baby chopped in half.
Yes, which is sort of what the second half of this text from Isaiah, right? God is saying, even mothers, right, may forget. It's possible. That's extreme, right? It's pretty extreme, but it's possible for, let's say, a parent to abandon their own child, right? But what does this text then say about God's heart and his compassion for his people? He will not. Right. Otherwise, I don't think it necessarily helps us understand our text from 1 Kings, other than it's interesting that it's connected in terms of the content. Let's do Psalm 72. Let's read verses 1 and 2. Yeah. Mm.
That happens all the time.
Mm.
How far we have come off and we don't even pay attention to it here. So it's just kind of like,
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's, I suppose it's telling when the things abstractly we would call extreme are happening sort of in front of your own eyes, right? And there's and that's, so what you acknowledge there, John, is a testament to kind of the scriptural narrative of the surrounding nations and the influence on the people of God, right? So just like with the people of Israel, whether it's worshiping on the high places or, for instance, the god Molech in the Old Testament, child sacrifice was a common practice. And even that bled into Israel, especially under bad kings. A sobering reminder that it's not as if there aren't things for the Christian community to stand for and to still be distinctive today. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Marilyn.
The big thing, like you would think there would be more people that would maybe go toward the adoption, but the thing is, everyone knows you're pregnant now.
Mm-hmm.
People that get abortions, a lot of people don't tell, some people don't even tell their family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because if you do a medical history, often you may find someone's had 5 pregnancies and 2 abortions.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times their family doesn't even know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's private medical information, but it's just, you know, if you can keep it secret, it doesn't affect people. Where if someone knows you're pregnant, there's a lot of pressure. Oh, gosh, you should keep this baby.
Mm.
Where if you don't feel like you could parent, that was the original idea of you could place the baby for an adoption.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who couldn't have a baby could have one.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's where there's so many abortions in this country. That's why a lot of people have been going to international to adopt, because a lot of the babies just aren't ever born.
Mm.
Be adopted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if they don't actually get to live, nobody else can.
And this is sort of, and maybe we'll jump ahead and sort of, because that whole commentary and idea sort of connect with, especially those comments there, in terms of considering, let's say, individual cases, right, where this happens, right? And each case is going to be unique, you know, in terms of a person's decision making, why they would do something. I'll make the claim in the sermon today that every decision we face in life fundamentally comes down to the question of where is your ultimate source of wisdom coming from? So Solomon, you know, puts the sword, you know, brings out the sword, and that sort of draws out the motivations for the two prostitutes, the two sex workers. But you think about abortion, right? There may be differing motives for differing people in it, but it still sort of exposes that, right? Like your commentary about it being held a secret.
Well, I think that's the biggest reason that people favor that over having a baby and placing for an adoption.
Mm-hmm.
My entire career, and I delivered babies for quite a few years. I had one person actually place a child for adoption
Mm-hmm.
in all those years. And, you know, I think years ago that maybe have been more common, or people get sent away to live with an aunt, and
Sure.
that's how they come back.
Yeah.
But, you know, if they have the abortion real early, not knew they were pregnant. So it's just, it's a way they can keep it private.
Mm-hmm.
So people don't comment on it or know about it.
Yeah.
And then they don't come in for grief because of.
Yeah, complicated problem. And I'm curious, just think about it for a moment. What do you think some of those motivations might be? Why someone would keep it secret? Because the motivations can be different.
My parents are going to kill me.
Sure, so there could be.
I mean, years ago, my partner delivered a baby in ER for one of his teenage patients.
Mm-hmm.
She came in with terrible belly pain when they did her, you know, you always do a gynae exam.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not pregnant. It's like, the head is right here.
Ah.
We can relieve your belly pain. All we got to do is deliver this baby. Her parents and family didn't know.
Yeah.
You know, my parents will kill me.
There you go. So one motivation could be, I have to appease my parents, or at least keep my reputation with my parents in a certain way, and there's no way I could ever blow that. See, that's a fundamental source of wisdom in decision making. Right? I mean, what else? What else might undergird someone's decision to have an abortion? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like you might say in the best case, a reasonable decision about like our financial situation and what we can actually do, out of care for the child, but it still seems absurd, right? To like this is how I'm going to carry out this care for the child. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
Often people want to adopt kids that can't find them,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting because it's just, or even like people like years ago, that one, the one tenor from Italy, the Andrea Bocelli, his parents were told to abort him
Mm.
because they thought there were going to be problems. He eventually became
Mm.
blind, but he's like, wow, I was glad.
To have his life.
Arnold,
Well, exactly.
he's like
Yeah.
an advocate of, I'm a
Uh-huh.
child that just had disabilities,
Yeah.
but still was able to live a good life.
Yeah. There's a woman, do you guys know Giovanni Jessen, I think is her name? She's another story like that where she actually it was an attempted abortion gone wrong. And she survived the abortion. And now as she speaks as well on behalf of life and even sought to reconcile with her own birth mother, and that took a long time for her to get to. But yeah, I mean, at the base, Jason, what we're talking about is, do I trust my own reason and kind of taking all the information in and getting the path forward to make the decision, right? Because it all rests sort of on me. Like I have to analyze and then, or do I have a directive, someone who has more wisdom than I, even if it seems impossible, right, to trust? Yeah.
Well, even the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, if you don't get the first one on this planet, you don't get to do the other.
Mm-hmm.
If you're aborted, you don't get to go to heaven.
Right.
How do you get to do the other ones on this earth? I mean, maybe in heaven, but not on this earth.
Yeah. And maybe the last comment just on that piece, unless John, you have another one, but is to acknowledge, like I referenced, Molech, right, in the Old Testament, and the child sacrifice. But there's the Epistle to Diognetus. This is written in like the 1st, 2nd century. It's one of the first apologetic writings of the early church, and there's a whole chapter where he talks about the distinctiveness of Christianity. One of the things mentioned, we don't place our children on the mountain. We don't expose our children. So this seems to be a problem that has affected cultures for all time. But Christianity, or the people of God, even pre-Christ, has always been distinctive in that capacity. Well, I just want to quick, I'm already like at time, I always go over. Listen, one or two, if you were to apply this passage, let's say you were to share it with someone. So what response do you think this passage could inspire in others if you shared it and your insights with them?
So if you do what's the right thing, in this case for this mom, it worked out
Mm.
for the baby,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it worked out for her.
Mm-hmm. It might be a support.
Doing the correct, morally correct thing.
Yeah, so it might be a claim for you about the existence of a design to the universe, like a flow that if you abide by it, things will go well for you. Yeah, which might get into questions of, well, what is that? design. What is that? Is there objective truth and reality, right? Yeah. What do you think it says, or do you think it would be striking to a person outside the church to say, look at the kind of an audience that God is willing to put before himself, that the king is willing to put before himself? You think that would speak to? Yeah. I think it's neat that the gospel gives us the space to even dialogue about things that most times culture wants to silence conversation on, right? And even address it. And I think the conversation around abortion sort of speaks to that. Now, how you're able to do it in a way where people can be brought in the conversation, that's the challenge, right? And there are going to be lots of people who just never will be. As soon as you bring it up, it's sort of like that's going to put them at arm's length. There you go. There you go. So, well, I will send you guys on your way. Let's just pray real quick for God's wisdom. Jesus, again, we thank you for your foolish wisdom. It looks foolish to us, but you're God and we're not. So give us the faith to trust in your word, the courage to live by it, and the grace to speak to others about it. Give us the sort of wisdom you had, Jesus, that gained you favor not only with God but also with men, so that more might see your willingness to meet with us, to lift us up, and to bless us through your wisdom. It's in your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen. Guys.